Trashy Shoulder 658. That has to be one of those random
Yeah,
generated usernames, right?
yeah, it has to be.
Confession. I'm still not comfortable with road mapping after 45 years of experience. Most of the time, we were just defining a list of features we plan to build at the start of each quarter and calling it a roadmap. Planning 1+ years ahead was non existent, but I know that's not how it's supposed to be done, yet without higher level strategy guidance from leadership, we never broke out of that cycle. Can I still call myself an experienced product manager without having done this critical road mapping process the quote right way? And I will say, I've never once done roadmaps the same way twice. I've never been in a company that does it the same way. It is a nonsense word that doesn't mean anything in my experience. It is fully dependent on why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, the audience that it's going for. Are you trying to talk to your board of directors and your leadership team and tell them what to expect from you? Or are you talking to your clients and trying to give them some insight into why they should expect you to continue to improve and do things that they're going to want to see in the future? Are you doing it so you can help engineering understand what's coming down the pike? There's so many audiences. It matters drastically whether you're agile, safe agile, waterfall. Are you doing 1 year planning, 2 year planning, 1 quarter planning? I've done it so many different ways. Most of the time I do now, next, later. Sometimes it's very feature oriented and sometimes it's outcome oriented. Sometimes it's like, yeah, by the end of the quarter, we'd like to have customers doing X. I'm not going to tell you the 4 features that are going to help customers do X because I don't know if I'm going to deliver all 4 of them by the end of the quarter. Like but it's so, I don't know, my first comment is roadmaps are dumb but also super helpful and it's tricky to find that balancing act. And two, I don't think anyone should judge themselves based on how effectively they've done it. You just need to be able to adapt to the teams that you're working with and your people who want to see something from you. I don't know.
I think roadmaps are awesome. And yes, they're tricky. I think, yeah, you've highlighted right things. There's different contexts for roadmaps. The
Right.
ones that I think I'm trying not to put the immediate things in my mind where it's like, hey, my last 10 years, where the roadmaps have changed, right?
Sure.
But I often ask this, like, how do big companies survive without a 2 to 3 year roadmap, right?
Sure.
So that would be my current thinking as an enterprise architect, and the last 10 years have been at that level of leadership where I'm thinking like, yeah, if you shut down this division, that's how do you know, right? Like,
But I think that's important, right? Because the roadmap you're talking about for the next 2 to 3 years is not listing the 47 features you're going to outline. It
right
is
now,
saying conceptually we are going to have an acquisition model, and then we're going to have
yeah,
the SMS capability, and then we're going to have whatever. And but the SMS capability might not happen in Q4. It might shift to Q1, and the actual list of features isn't defined, right? Like
yeah,
that's the problem with roadmaps. Is people get stuck in this idea of like, well, waterfall used to be a concrete plan of every single feature for the next 2 years, and agile isn't that way. Correct, but you do need guidance. You need to know we don't need to worry about the enterprise level clients and the security requirements that they have until 2026 because it's just not in the business plan to deal with that type of requirement. And so you can know when you're building the API feature, don't do it so poorly that you can't have all the security features later, but you don't need to spend that much time on them now. Like there's benefit to degrees of roadmaps.
yeah. And I think if you do a good job, you can. And here's, I always think about like the complaints I hear and the pain points that I see in companies when I link it back. This is the anti-pattern thing, right? Like, here's a fire, but actually, you can fix it by doing this. And
Right.
roadmaps are interesting because if you're working somewhere where it's sophisticated and you can link your business objectives, even your quarterly goals, right? But let's take business objectives. If you can start to link that to your tech initiatives and your tech roadmap or your product roadmap, now people have a place where this, you work in those environments where like, we don't know what the priority is for this quarter or this year. And
Right.
and now you have a very public sort of living, breathing thing. That's the thing about a roadmap is it can't be created in 1984 and it's never
Right.
changed, right? It has to live and breathe. So it has to be driven from data that's changing daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever, right? Um, so I love those roadmaps, and I like the examples you use too, because I think it's something like hey, we want to capture the market in Latin America next year,
Right.
or we want to break into the Ukraine in December, because they link to global events. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, guess what? Russia invaded Ukraine last night. Our
Mm-hmm.
roadmap is no longer, and I'm being dramatic here, but there were companies who were actually affected
Right.
by global events and their roadmaps changed. They lost engineering groups who were in those locations. They had features based on those geographical locations or political stability, like travel and tourism, right? Like, hey, we're
Right.
no longer flying over the Ukraine. Cool. How many companies had to adjust for that? Um, so I think that's where I look at roadmaps. My current interest is the company business objectives linking to the roadmap. And then the lower down you get closer to the I shouldn't say lower down, but the closer you get to the ground and the hands-on keyboards writing code,
Right.
yeah, probably less focus for me over the last few years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's been harder, especially, I think, at least our experience, probably, the world has been shifting and changing too quickly to do much more than knowing what feature is going to happen in the next quarter or so, and we can know generally these are the directions we want to go. But it should be good. We should be happy that we're able to adapt and say, oh, okay, Google's changed its mind about whether or not you're going to allow to do cookies a certain way, and so we're going to, not need to do this feature that we were planning on doing or something else. Like, it's good that you can adapt, but you're not adapting. We still have big goals that we want to hit. It's what you're saying. It's like that company objective versus the tactical steps you're going to take to get there. I think the thing that gets tricky is you get into situations with sales where they'll show the roadmap to the client and tell the client, yep, good news, in June you're going to have this capability. And that's why I don't do roadmaps with dates on them anymore. You get now, next, later, because that gives me a little bit of room to not have to actually commit to stuff. It's, I don't know, there's a downside to roadmaps when they turn into commitments, because it's a tricky balancing act. Yes, you should, if you have clients who you've signed up and told them in the next year we're going to do a thing for you, the renewal is at risk. They are not going to sign back up if you don't do that thing for them. So that's okay. But getting stuck into this, like, by June 1st we will do X, kills your ability to adapt and respond. And what happens when the massive bug comes in on May 28th?
So you can't cut this out, even though it sounds crazy.
Okay.
But one of my favorite Bruce Lee moments is he's working with one of his students and he puts his finger in front of his face and he says, take a look. And the kid looks at the finger and he smacks him on the head and he says, don't look at the finger. If you look at the finger, you will miss all the heavenly glory. And that's how I feel about what you just said. If your roadmap is just this fixated on one metric, which is the date, your roadmap you're not deriving the value out of your roadmap, right? Like,
Right.
you've tied it to something that actually you've tied it to one of the worst metrics, like the date can change.
Right.
And that's how I feel about the business level roadmap objectives. If you've tied at the right level for all those people, like working in business architecture and product and business and finance, they're looking at these metrics on the roadmap, right? Like, hey, if we shut this division down, yeah, it's only this much revenue, but by the way, 40% of the architecture is actually in there too, and we have to separate them. So that's a big project, right? And then you do eventually get down to IT guys who are the guys who are like, well, that's an Oracle database. It's going to take us 3 years to move it. Guess what? That ain't going to work. This is a 2-year roadmap, right? So
Yep.
I do think about roadmaps in that sense. Like it's like that the knock, right? Like I want the CEO to see a green circle or a red circle, and then as you drill in, you're eventually getting to the guy who's looking at the memory optimization, saying something's wrong. So
Right.
yeah, I like what you just said. The date thing really screws it up.
Yep. Well, and I think there's also, this is where I don't know that any of the current software does a great job of this. This is where, if the roadmap's not tied to the business value, and if the features aren't tied to the KPIs that get you towards that capability, like that whole chain all the way up and down from the task under the user story all the way up to the business value and the company goal for the next 2 years. If you can't if the engineer can't explain why they're working on that one piece of code right now, everyone in the chain has done a bad job, from the CEO all through the product manager all the way down to the engineer. And the roadmap is a part of that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because it was a conversation I've had recently with a friend about when it is vague, like what value do I bring to a company? If I can see my name attached to something on a business objective, I don't feel separated when that business objective is one of the things
Right.
that is sort of, you know, talked about at the end of the year. Like, hey, we hit this business objective. It's like, cool. I feel I feel just, I feel like my position is justified. Like I did good work. Like
Right.
I'm associated with a winning piece of the roadmap. I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think it also removes that propensity for engineers to say, I don't know where my focus is. I can say, at very least, I can tell you which business objective you're sort of
Right.
fulfilling, right?
Exactly. Yeah.